As we continue, Peter Ducey is up in Washington with some info. Peter?
Brett, we've now heard from the top Democrats in Congress. Nancy Pelosi, who recently said that she's not interested in pursuing impeachment proceedings at any point against President Trump, and Chuck Schumer, who said, let's just wait for the Mueller report. So I'm going to read to you from a joint statement from both Pelosi and Schumer. It says, now that Special Counsel Mueller has submitted his report to the Attorney General, it is imperative for Mr. Barr to make the full report public and provide its underlying documentation and findings to Congress. Attorney General Barr must not give President Trump, his lawyers, or his staff any sneak preview of Special Counsel Mueller's findings or evidence, and the White House must not be allowed to interfere in decisions about what parts of those findings or evidence are made public. The Special Counsel's investigation focused on questions that go to the integrity of our democracy itself, whether foreign powers corruptly interfered in our elections, and whether unlawful means were used to hinder that investigation. The American people have a right to the truth. The watchword is transparency. And separate from that, Brett, I just spoke on the phone to a key Trump ally on the Republican side on Capitol Hill who said the fact that we found out the report had been submitted but did not instantly find out about new indictments, this lawmaker thinks is a positive step for the president. And again, Republicans are seem pleased, at least for now, that the word collusion has not been used by anybody at the Justice Department, even though we don't know what's in the report. Brett.
Yeah, Peter, thank you. Senior Department of Justice official telling our own Jake Gibson, quote, Special Counsel Mueller is not recommending any further indictments. Again, the news coming from the Department of Justice, a senior DOJ official, quote, Special Counsel Robert Mueller not recommending any further indictments.
Well, that's significant, Brett, although I think it's when it comes to this, the question we're all waiting finally at long last for the answer to, on this question of collaboration. It's been discussed at some length throughout all of this, whether if there were such collaboration, it would be a crime. And if Mr. Mueller decides that no indictment should ensue because of that, that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't find any improper hanky-panky between the Trump campaign and the Russians. It may just be that he found that it wasn't criminal. Now, my own sense about this is that it's hard to imagine that it's come as far as we have, with as much effort has been made to investigate this whole matter, both inside and outside the government, that if there'd been any such thing, we wouldn't have heard about it by now. But it is worth keeping in mind that there is this legal question of whether if it had been turned up, it would have even been a crime, and therefore if there are no further indictments, that might not mean that they found nothing improper.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we don't know yet, but that sentence in and of itself, after all of the months and months of speculation of what could happen, the fact that they are saying that this special counsel report does not recommend any further indictments is significant in and of itself, just on its face. It's right to point out that the Southern District of New York is continuing its investigation, that there are more investigations on Capitol Hill. But if this report, Britt, does not deliver the punch that perhaps critics of the president or Democrats had hoped it would, and it seemed like the coverage over recent days, there was a preparation for that fact up on Capitol Hill. If it doesn't, will the president then take that and say, see, I told you so, you need to stop and move on and get things done?
Yeah, he undoubtedly will say that, and I would suggest this, Brett, that Democrats on Capitol Hill have already been signaling that even if he doesn't find anything in the neighborhood of collaboration, that they intend to pursue that issue further. Particularly Adam Schiff on the House Intelligence Committee intends to pursue that. I think if Mueller comes out and there is nothing suggesting improper behavior between the president and the Russians before the election, I think a lot of the political wind will go out of those sails, because a lot of people are going to look at this and say, "Come on! I mean, you've been pursuing this all this time. Now Mueller, whose long-awaited report is upon us, he didn't find anything. What are you doing?" So my sense about that is that while those investigations may drag on, they may have to drag on with a lot less media attention than they once would have hoped for.
The special counsel's report in the hands of Attorney General William Barr. Just hours before its delivery, President Trump came out swinging, insisting there was no collusion between his 2016 campaign and Russia.
I have no idea about the Mueller report. We're going to see what happens. It's going to be very interesting, but we'll see what happens. There was no collusion. There was no obstruction. Everybody knows it. It's all a big hoax. I call it the witch hunt. It's all a big hoax.
This as Fox obtains new text messages tonight showing FBI officials were concerned about, quote, possible bias of a main source they used in order to get a surveillance warrant on a top Trump campaign aide. And not surprisingly, the text also revealed bureau brass circulated at least 2 anti-Trump blog articles. Joining me now to weigh in on all of this, former Trump 2016 campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Corey, I could see you shaking your heads. We'll talk about the FBI because you were right there when they were starting all this. But your reaction to the Mueller report being issued tonight?
Look, I think it's a fantastic thing that this witch hunt is finally over. 675 days, 1 year, 10 months, and 6 days, $40 million of taxpayer money wasted, all to show what we knew from the very beginning, that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, between the president and the Russians. There was no collusion, and this report has put a nail in that coffin. And what the Democrats are going to do is they're going to say, well, this isn't the end, it's only the beginning, because they can't help themselves. But what we now know, and what is just broken, is that Bob Mueller is leaving the special counsel, meaning there are no sealed indictments waiting. Right. We know that there are no current indictments waiting. This report is over. It has cleared the president. It has cleared our team, the team that they spied on because they didn't like our politics. That's what this report is now going to show.
Corey, how many thousands of times, and I'm not exaggerating one bit, how many thousands of times have Democrat politicians said there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia? So often, so many times, with such absolute certainty, doesn't this president deserve an apology?
He absolutely deserves apology from both Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell, who said without equivocation, 100% they have seen evidence of collusion. That's what they've said. And they've said, we're going to wait for Bob Mueller's report to come out so that we can go after it and impeach this president. And that's what really the goal has always been, is to use the Mueller report as a jumping off point to impeach the president. Except now, what the Mueller report shows, and it's very important to articulate, never once did anybody who Bob Mueller was reporting to ever preclude him from doing anything, from stopping him, from talking to anybody, or directing him to not do something. He's articulated that very clearly as been required. We know that he has now said in the report, we're almost certain of it, there was no collusion between the president or anybody else, and there are no indictments from anybody. So anything that Bob Mueller investigated that ended up in a criminal probe happened that had nothing to do with the campaign, whether it was Paul Manafort or Michael Cohen or whoever that may have been. But you also have to remember, they tried to get Dr. Jerome Corsi to sign a plea deal and plead guilty to something he never did. And now that the Mueller report is over, he's free and clear.
Well, and again, we have to emphasize that what we are hearing is in the report come from some sources. Obviously, we will hear over the course of the weekend, as the Attorney General has said, he will begin to roll out details of what's in the report, and hopefully we'll be able to see it from the beginning until the end. I think everybody wants that. But the moral authority of those Democrats who said with absolute certainty to the American public, to their constituents, something that apparently is not at any way in coordination with the truth. I just wonder what has happened to their moral authority as they continue these investigations. They want the public to believe that they have the moral authority to continue to investigate based on a charge that has been proved or appears to be proved false.
Well, they're morally bankrupt, clearly, and we have to remember how this whole thing began. Hillary Clinton lost the election is what it came down to. And what we found out was her team took $5 million and hired a former British spy to create this false dossier. Right. That Jim Comey, who at the time was the director of the FBI, presented then President-elect Donald Trump in a one-on-one meeting, and then he leaked that information both to his former law professor and to the media to say that it was a document presented to the president in a classified briefing. That's how this whole thing began, and that's why we know the whole thing was a farce. Jim Comey has hopefully, legal accountability for both lying to Congress and leaking classified information. We know that his deputy, Andy McCabe, has already been referred for criminal prosecution. And we hope that Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and Jim Baker, who is the chief legal counsel there, all also get criminal referrals and are held accountable for using their badges and their positions in the government to go after Americans because they didn't like our politics.
Well, and Corey, as I'm sure you noticed, some terrific reporting by Fox News today showing that indeed there were discussions between the FBI and the Justice Department. The Justice Department officials, several, were quite worried that the FBI was using political blogs as evidence to spy on Americans. I mean, you're supposed to use evidence that's credible. You're not supposed to use politically motivated blogs in order to obtain warrants. The way in which the FBI was used to try to overturn an election and to disrupt an election before it actually happened is not only disgraceful, but it comes very close to being a coup d'etat. Would you not agree?
I agree with you 100%, and that's why I would once again ask the president to declassify those certain pages of the last Pfizer application so we can see the information that they use, because we know that the FBI was leaking information to media outlets to then include those in additional Pfizer applications, because the first Pfizer application that they tried to spy on Americans was denied because it was so outrageously against the Fourth Amendment of our Constitution. But they found a way around it. They lied, they cheated, they stole, all because they didn't like the fact that Donald Trump won. They had an insurance policy, and they did everything they could first to try and stop him, and then to throw him out of office after he was elected.
Well, using the powers of government, using the surveillance powers of the FBI and the Justice Department to spy on a political campaign, not based on any substantive evidence, but based on political blogs. Somebody's got to be accountable somewhere down the line. But at least the Mueller investigation is over, and I'm sure you're glad, as most of the American public is glad as well, as we've now seen by the polls, even before we came to the end of this investigation. Corey Lewandowski, great to see you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, President Trump says the public should get to see the Mueller report, but the one making that decision is this man, Attorney General William Barr, who now has the report. What could stop him from releasing it publicly? Let's ask my next guest, Attorney Misty Maris. Frankly, I don't think anything is going to get him to stop it. Do you?
Well, there's certain legal limitations, and some of that comes with the rules of the special counsel. So certainly some parts of the report could be held back if it implicates unindicted individuals. Those parts might need to be held back. Certain documentary evidence that served as the basis, to the extent that it was part of an indictment. So something like that could stop the information from being entirely public.
But it wouldn't be the substantive conclusions of the investigation, right? It would just be redacted material relating to whatever it is that is intel that cannot be released. So the public would still be able to see the substantive conclusions of Mr. Mueller.
Yes, absolutely. Those principal conclusions, those are going to be out. So we're going to know what the results of the investigation are, what Mueller actually found. That's what the public is absolutely going to hear. It's the stuff that came out during grand jury proceedings, which are secret. That will likely be redacted and kept out of the final report. But Bill Barr, he has a lot of discretion in his role in making the determination about what's going to be public and what's going to be held back for these various legal reasons.
Misty, very quickly, we were talking, Corey Lewandowski and I were talking about what went down between the FBI and the Justice Department just before and just after the election. Stuff was done that was clearly illegal, intentionally done in order to spy on a campaign for political purposes, nothing other than political purposes, with no solid evidence to do so. Shouldn't somebody be held to an account? I know Americans are fed up with investigations at this point, but this is an investigation, I think, that needs to be done, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, the blatant abuse when obtaining the FISA warrant and the text messages that you just described in your last segment, David, it's absolutely deplorable. We're losing credibility with the feds. I mean, it's terrible. So certainly there needs to be an investigation. I said from the beginning, this should have been the focus of the investigation, this bias internally at the FBI. And certainly someone needs to be held accountable and get it back on track.